When Mickey Wolfson looks into an antique dealer's window, he sees entire worlds now lost and forgotten. To collect and revive these worlds has become his life's mission. In his passion not to lose any witnesses to the past, he's filled 2 museums on 2 continents, illuminating the dramatic period between 1885 and 1945 that he's chosen for his quest.
Up we go to Ellie. Okay.
How are you?
I'm good, and you? I've never seen it so clean.
All right.
Oh, I know what this is. I've got one. I got one.
Is
This is,
exact
but I
same
have
one?
all the pieces.
You do?
Yeah.
Can I have the pieces?
This is a transatlantic dressing table, and we have one in the museum.
Do you have this?
I must admit I don't.
Fixture from Queen Victoria and Albert's yacht, the V&A 2, launched
God.
at Pembroke Dockyard, January 16th, 1855.
It's too funny to think that Queen Victoria, sat there.
This is like an early biofeedback kind of device. This is in my Quack Medical department, and the original label on the inside there. This goes in here, and this in your ears.
Yeah. You're some kind of a genius.
It's an
I'm
incredible.
not sure what kind.
There's only 2 of these guys known.
I'm sure.
There's only 2 of these known.
And you've got them both.
I do actually.
I knew it.
I do. 1860s, 70s, about that.
Maybe a little earlier.
Maybe a little earlier. Goes on a stand. This is a headlight tester and a lining device from the 30s. Phenomenal piece, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How much is that?
It's amazing. This one's $3,500.
No,
Isn't that a
that's
beautiful
gorgeous. What a
And
gorgeous.
can be used by hand as well.
Ellie, that I really love to know more about. I think it's phenomena, the robot headlight thing.
Yeah.
Because I think that's really interesting for us. As an example of American streamline, for an exhibition on Streamlined America. I think you couldn't do better than that.
No matter where he is, Wolfson makes the rounds of shops and dealers, refining and perfecting his collection of decorative arts and propaganda. He's searching and he's probing. He's following leads, and not a day goes by without a purchase.
Yes.
I mean, you just walk in the door and there it is. It's sitting there.
Let's look at it. No, don't love them. Don't love it.
Yeah. Elizabeth.
No, I'm not into it. It's too caricatures.
Because you have all the others.
Yes, so I should take these
Yeah.
too, no?
Yeah.
Very good, you all. Very good. Damn.
I know, it's hard to find these now. I'm sure.
I mean, I love this, and this is so Wolfsonian. You know, with the feel. I mean, that's us. But
Yeah,
$25,000. I mean, what kind of nonsense is that now?
That's not that high.
We'll figure out some formula whereby you get the money, they get the glory, and I get the painting. There must be a way.
If there is a way, Wolfson will find it. He's famous for getting what he wants, and just as famous for having plenty of space to store and exhibit what he's got.
I come from a family of collectors. Both parents collected. My sister says she doesn't, but she does. Everybody in the family had this, this collecting bug.
I first met Mickey in my London gallery. It was the early to mid-1980s, and I didn't know who he was.
Decorative junk.
At the time, I had some Anglo-Indian chairs in the window, and he was looking at them with the chap who turned out to be his curator, Stephen.
Did you say it was all organized by size?
I said they were Anglo-Indian, and Stephen, the curator, said that he didn't think they would fit into the collection. And Mickey, and remember, I knew nothing about this man at all, and excused my American accent, said, well, if they don't fit into the collection, wouldn't they be fabulous on the dining car of the train?
Everyone seems to have a take on what Wolfson collects. Some have called him a hunter-gatherer, others an archaeologist whose digs reach clear across the globe. Some see him as a mad shopper, creating an eclectic and very personal overview of the industrial age.
It's a cubist bird feeder.
From the dawn of modern times, 1885, to the end of World War II in 1945.
I got it in California. No, California, USA, at the Olympics, San Francisco, 1932. And this was done, it's partially molded and partially hand finished. You can touch it.
He would drop in now and again, and he'd come in and he would ask for things for the aesthetic movement, something extraordinary. And if you couldn't find anything for him, he'd say, you must have something dark and gloomy, something totally unsaleable.
You know, the grand and gloomy, the grander and gloomier, the better it was. There were certain thematic areas, such as nature as it confronts technology and the rape of nature, certainly post-industrial revolution.
This, on the other hand, once again, a reference to the past. This refers, of course, to Michelangelo's Pietà. But this is
It's just a certain look, too, in terms of that period, which produced a lot of this social realism, a lot of dark and gloomy work.
Somber painting underscores the dangers that workers experience in industrial plants worldwide.
Conventional beauty has very little to do with it.
Interpretation, or if you... It's not art for art's sake. They're objects in function of ideas for the information age. This really is the thing which I've always been most interested in.
The stronger the message, the better. And so propaganda is at the heart of Wolfson's collection.
These were for school children, and once again, it's the state informing about dress, the state informing about the 5-year plan, the state... This card shows, as I turn the wheel, how...
Mickey's collecting was very, very different to most of the other collectors I sell to, and as he was buying for his own personal museum, he had a leeway that national and international museum curators don't have. Even very wealthy collectors have restrictions in space. Mickey never had that. He had warehouses where he would just put things away. He would just buy things that he passionately liked. He also, of course, had, let's not be bashful, a very deep pocket compared to most collectors, so he could afford to indulge himself where others might hold back.
If you were interested in fashion, you would immediately be able to read the high neck jacket and the
Early days of his collecting, I mean, he was only really interested in America, Britain, and Italy. And it's only in more recent years that he has embraced France, Germany, Russia, etc. But of course, being Mickey, I mean, who is a very inclusive person, then he said, but Peyton, you know, I mean, when I mean Britain, naturally we include India, Australia, the whole British Empire. Although he starts out says he has quite limited aims, they expand in the way that everything does with Mickey.
People asked me a lot the period why I started 1885 to 1945. Purely arbitrary, I'm afraid to admit. I should have started earlier and gone beyond. I should have started in the 1830s, perhaps, and gone on to 1989 with the fall of the Berlin Wall. I laterally enter into a developing modernism in aesthetics and in ideas, and I end, sadly, mistakenly, in 1945, which was a date that I took for the end of the old world order. But as long as I'm alive, the collection, or my collection, will respect those dates.
Isn't that incredible?
Yes, what's the date?
Around 1800.
Ah,
I know.
tragedy has struck.
I think you need to loosen the time period you're looking at.
As to spending money, I mean, I do buy souvenirs along the way. Are these expensive?
No, this whole collection is $3,500.
And for us? It's a new client.
New clients. New clients.
Yeah.
They're the ones that pay the most.
And I guess my souvenirs are more expensive than postage stamps or postcards.
But he also bought this extraordinary Gothic Revival palazzo in Genoa, which was then called the Castello Mackenzie, now called Castello Mackenzie Wolfson, which is a 60-room, towered, turreted, battlemented palazzo. It was sort of midway between the most fantastic Gothic revival of William Burgess and the fantasies of Walt Disney. If Castello Mackenzie hadn't existed, I think somebody would have had to have built it for Mickey. And if Mickey hadn't existed, Genoa would have lost one of its great treasures, because I can't think there would have been any other single individual mad enough to take on the restoration of this crazy building.
This particular one won first place. This is Earl Brink, and he won first place in the competition. And this has everything that he did from start to finish, all the design drawings, the entry packet that you needed to compete with it. It had literally everything.
I'm heartbroken. It's 1946. I can't believe it.
Why?
Because I quit in 1945.
Oh, you used to work for them?
No, my collection stops in 45. Oh, I can't believe it. This is so interesting, really
it has
interesting.
Everything from start to finish. I mean, it really should be like in a design museum. Yeah. Just all the different photos.
It's wonderful, it's wonderful. 1946, I can't believe it. I promise you everything. It'll go to a design museum. Everything is perfect, it's fantastic, etc., but it's 1946. What's the price?
I'll do $3,800 on it.
I dare not. I can't believe it. You wouldn't take 3, would you? If you do it, I'd buy it now, right now.
Where's it going?
Well, there's a museum on Miami Beach called the Wolfsonian, which is a museum of decorative and applied arts and how design reforms and persuades.
For that,
And
I will.
it's sold. Thank you very much. Do you take credit cards?
I will. I'm thrilled it's going there.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
because
that in itself makes me very pleased.
well, thank you so much.
Strictly speaking, the Wolfsonian, owned and run by the state of Florida, is Wolfson's museum no more. But the spirit and the presence of the founder are still felt in this Miami Beach institution.
Wolfsonian, it sounded so funny, and it had a certain dignity to it. Smithsonian, Wolfsonian, I mean, it flows.
We all sort of thought it was a joke at first, but it certainly stuck. That was how the Wolfsonian was born.
Oh, it's brilliant. That's brilliant. This is so singularly Key West. It's quite a spectacular landscape, and also the architecture is not usual.
Key West has a hometown feeling for Mickey Wolfson. He spent a lot of time in this southern outpost as a young boy.
I got drunk here first. I got in trouble here first. Well, I ran with a gang here. Oh, I mean, we tore this place. You have no idea. We used to go to strip joints with the guys. They used to have to send the sheriff to get, and we'd fight him because we knew him. And boy, we were bad. Oh, were we bad? God.
Few people know that Mickey Wolfson has a muse hidden away in the town's lush greenery.
Susie?
He stops by each time he visits Key West.
Susie? Susie, do you think that this is a world of your own creation? This is an environment completely invented by you?
Well, I just think it's a place where somebody doesn't have enough time to clean it up. Plus, it's just a person that can't throw anything away.
Oh, yeah, like me.
Yeah,
Same thing.
That's the problem.
But see, but it's so interesting because now I see it actually as a world, an entire culture that you've created, and it all represents something. It's autobiographical. This is exactly what my house looks like. Look at these divine sculptures. I know. She's our most distinguished artist. Susie, there's nothing for me, a little souvenir. How about the horse? You only can steal it, or...
I was saving this for somebody else.
Really?
But I'll give it to you.
Thank you, my dear.
You're welcome.
The Wolfson family's American story begins here in Key West with the arrival of Joseph Wolfson in 1882. If family lore is to be believed, his ship hit a reef and he was shipwrecked in these waters.
But it is true that my antecedents were shipwrecked. I don't know where they were going or why they were going there.
The Wolfsons thrived in this hospitable, cosmopolitan port town. And Mitchell Wolfson, Mickey's father, was born here in 1900. The family ran a dry goods store. Mitchell was all of 17 when he left Key West in search of better opportunities and settled in Miami, the new rival town to the north.
The Miami they came to had been a wilderness until 1896 when the railroad entered Miami for the first time, and then there was this instant city.
Especially it boomed in Florida, a fine place to go.
But Miami by the 1920s was changing quickly because of a great real estate boom that swept Florida.
The city of Miami throve mightily.
And it was looked upon by a lot of people as a land of opportunity.
All over the country were buying Florida house lots.
Mitchell, Mickey's dad, he had a wonderful, charming way about relating to everyone, and he used it to disarm you.
He had fun. He was a real kind of a playboy. He fell in love with my mother, who was 18 years old and just moved down from Pensacola. They married, and it was the largest wedding of its day in Miami.
Frances Wolfson was a granddaughter of the first Jewish judge in Florida, who served in Pensacola in 1884.
They got married in 1926, and they had a very traditional marriage, but by all accounts, a deeply, deeply strong, passionate, lifelong commitment to each other.
Colonel Mitchell Wolfson was a very entrepreneurial guy who I think thought 3 steps ahead of the average person.
It was in 1926 that he and his brother-in-law started Wometco, the Wolfson-Meyer Theater Company.
To meet this problem head on.
Once he'd become a successful businessman, Mitchell Wolfson decided to give back to the community and went into politics, first as a councilman, then as the first Jewish mayor of his hometown.
Amazing, because Miami Beach openly and clandestinely discriminated against Jews through the 20s into the 30s, as late as the 1950s, at least into the early 50s, on the beach and all the way up the coast.
In 1943, Wolfson traded the hat of mayor, community activist, for that of an enlisted man in the armed forces, and returned home with the rank of lieutenant colonel.
Comes back, and he sees a whole new era with television. And he jumps into this, and at the end of the 1940s, he opens the first television station in all of Florida, WTVJ. So he becomes now not only an entrepreneur in this new communications business, but an opinion shaper in a huge way.
By the 1950s, Wometco had become an entertainment empire. It owned the best movie theaters in town, and Hollywood stars arrived in Miami for world premieres.
The Wolfsons threw these lavish parties for everybody, and were very much people that drew others in. They both were very public people. Frances Wolfson was a great entertainer. They threw parties in a tremendous sense of style.
I mean, this was not just a Miami empire and a Miami family. These people were super cosmopolitan.
Mickey, a.k.a. Mitchell Wolfson Jr., was born into this world of glamour and civic pride in 1939. He was the youngest, arriving years after his siblings, Louis and Frankie.
My impression of Mickey's parents are that they were very much devoted to each other. Mickey was a late child, and I believe they were more involved with each other than they were with really raising him. I do get a sense that he had some kind of a lonely childhood. He did grow up in a very beautiful home. He was exposed to beauty from a fairly early age. His mother was quite an accomplished painter. She studied in the Asian tradition. She had to have been someone who does not always live within the boundaries of common expectations. Perhaps some of that rubbed off on Mickey.
The Wolfsons did take enormous amount of trips. They went on these 12-week family vacations that were all over the world, and they would bring their children along. I have to believe that they saw things, they collected things, and Mickey learned.
When I began to travel, I wanted a souvenir or a remembrance of where I had gone and how I had gotten there. So thus I collected the keys to the destination of the travels. These were the great keys. Look at this from the Grand Hotel in Warsaw. And all the ocean liners are represented here. The Ile-de-France, Liberté, the Maurice in Paris. Here's Canadian Pacific, the Princess Margaret. Here's the Yarmouth Castle. All gone.
Mickey describes being taken to Germany right after the war. Mickey saw how his father embraced the Germans and how he accepted them, and this was an important gesture of tolerance for Mickey and a kind of acceptance. And so I think that Mickey learned from this.
His father was such a giant that Mickey grew up knowing that he had to do something to achieve relevance and validation as a person in comparison with his father. Clearly, this was in his head all the time. He understood that in many ways, for him, all things were possible. The young boy who grew up in Miami Beach, a world-class resort, with all the amenities that great wealth would bring, with a yearning for something more, unquenchable thirst to understand why the world is the way it is, and what is he supposed to do in the world.
There's too much going on.
The making of the Wolfsonian is, in essence, the story of the little boy making good. The story of a boy who needed a mission and whom birth and circumstances had handed the chance of finding one.
How are you?
Mickey was always the person who was interested in the arts, was not interested in business. Mickey is more interested in creativity and ideas. He staked out his territory differently from his father and his brother and the rest of his family. But he was always the black sheep of the family, and he admits it himself.
If you imagine Mickey knowing that he had no interest in and no chance to succeed in his father's world, you can see the roots of his desire to demonstrate that there was another world as well, a world in which he could succeed, a world in which he was more expert and more knowledgeable than his father.
My father must have given me 5 francs in Paris when I was 12 in 1952. And I went with my brother on the Seine to look at the bookstores. And I saw The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, illustrated by Gustave Doré. And I had never seen anything so remarkable. That was my moment of transformation. And I bought the book. these mysterious, haunting, frightening, tempestuous, and tragic views. It had all the drama that a child could possibly cope with.
Some of America's first-class schools were enlisted to turn young Wolfson into an educated citizen of the world. At Princeton, he developed a keen interest in history and the arts. At Johns Hopkins, he took a course in propaganda and began to connect the dots.
There's no question that Mickey's interest in propaganda derives from his having seen as a boy the radical and concrete effects of propaganda in the lives of what he describes paradoxically as the most educated and cultured people in Europe. And understanding the way in which a cultured and civilized people could be seduced by propaganda.
With his easy manner, his knowledge of politics and history, and his facility for languages, young Wolfson was a natural for a diplomatic career. He joined the State Department and served in Italy as American Vice Consul in Turin and Genoa, a city that would become a second home to him. After 5 years and a brief marriage to an Italian aristocrat, he resigned from the diplomatic service. Life was too short, he felt, to be spending it away from his first and foremost love, collecting. He went for the things that others had no eye for, decorative arts with a strong message.
When I started with the Amsterdam School, nobody focused in on that. The German material, nobody in their right mind collected German material here. Even Italian material, you see, that wasn't well known, because it had been discredited by the regime.
Collecting such unusual fare allowed young Wolfson to claim and affirm his status as a maverick and a provocateur.
Every time that Mickey visited me, he would begin by saying, well, yes, I see what you have. That's all very nice, but don't you have anything from Senegal? Or where's the Egyptian section? Or do you have anything on Swaziland? And he said this not only because he knew I very likely didn't have what he was looking for. It was because he was a really relentless champion of cultures that had been neglected, because there is a master narrative in art history and in design, and he did not accept that.
I felt these objects, they somehow spoke to me because they were pictures, if you will, of history. And I could read history actually through the visuals. I feel that it's awfully hard for an object or an expression of humankind to lie. But what's interesting is here it says Secretary General of Information, and here it says affiche, this is a poster executed under the German occupation, August 1944. So it has the censorship. Now we don't understand how it's possible that a poster like this could be produced for the liberation of France done under the Nazis. Now how is it possible? The whole collection is an attempt to salvage what's salvageable so that the memory of those objects, those buildings, those people, those portraits wouldn't be lost.
I think that Mickey saved objects that would have gone to the scrap dealer, that would have been just discarded and never seen again, with the idea that another generation would come and be able to take measure of what our civilization did. He was much more looking ahead, not behind.
This was in the early 80s. Miami was kind of a backwater at that time. There wasn't much happening. But Mickey was beginning to collect, and people in our circle kind of knew this, and everybody was dying to see what he had.
Mickey lived in this apartment which was surrounded by the collection with one small little bed, and the rest was all taken over by piles and piles of books. There were, I believe, 4 bathrooms, but all but one had been taken over and were libraries filled with books.
Frances Wolfson didn't live to see her son's cabinet of wonders in full flower. She died in 1980, and if the fledgling collector had hoped his work would impress his father, he was disappointed.
When he saw what the collection was made up of, he joined the circle that classified it at best as glorious junk, at worst just junk.
Colonel Wolfson died in 1983.
Mickey never dreamed of taking over the empire, and his sister didn't want it either. And we had to watch all of this unfold when the entire corporate domain of Wometco was dumped into Mickey and his sister Frankie's laps.
A year later, Wometco was sold. The 2 surviving Wolfson siblings inherited a multi-million-dollar fortune.
It gave me the chance to, you know, expand my the possibilities of my collecting, but it didn't. I mean, I didn't change cars, I didn't change clothes, I didn't change houses, I didn't change. I mean, there's nothing I changed. I still like what I like.
The collector, who was assisted by curator Stephen Greengard, now began to exhibit seriously.
I'm here at the Mitchell Wolfson Jr. Gallery, where there's a lot of excitement. They're getting ready for next week's Style of Empire, British art from 1877 to 1947. And with me right now is the man who's made it possible.
But people always thought that he was a rich man having fun, and they often said dilettante or eccentric, or I think he was focused from the very beginning. He knew what he wanted to do.
The Great Britain and the British Isles are where modern design originated.
He was trying to save things for posterity, but many of the people at that time couldn't see that. And he must have spent hours in his hotel room every night after a day expedition of shopping, organizing all of the little pieces of paper, the copies from books, and he would organize them in little envelopes and say, this goes with that. And so when the things finally came to Miami, we would have the background information on it.
And of course, travel, it's a very important form of business for Mickey. That's his business, is to travel and discover and learn. It goes hand in hand with collecting.
His idea of travel is not to check into the Four Seasons and go to a 5-star restaurant. His idea is, where is it happening? Where are they cooking it? Where do they get the food? Where is it dug up from? Where is the process, the raw materials?
Pocket ribs is fabulous.
This excites him.
Barbecue ribs, St. Louis style. Oxtails over rice, country fried steak with brown gravy.
I'll have the fried cow.
Taylor, can you look up on the internet the city of Frankfurt, Germany, and try to find out if the museums are opened on Monday, this coming Monday? People ask me about my traveling. I'm not sure I'm a traveler. It is true that I move around, I prowl, I ramble, I meander, but I don't think that's what I mean by travel. I think in my case, I journey. I'm campaigning in a way. I take expeditions. It has nothing to do with nomadism, not at all. It's an expedition. It's a pilgrimage. I'm searching. It's purposeful. It's really to recover witnesses to human behavior.
L'histoire de la nature italien.
He's out and about right at the
Nowhere is the intense pace of Wolfson's life better captured than in his famous itineraries, reams of paper that resemble the schedule of a head of state. They reflect the fast-paced life of a man who has long given up conventional family life and is married to his collection and all the activities it entails.
It gives him great terror to be without a plan for an evening. That could be one of the worst things you could possibly do, is flub up and find Mickey somewhere where he doesn't have a party to go to, or a theater, or a dance performance, or something, or all three in one evening.
The level of activity is very intense. He can't stop, and the question is why not, and what would happen if he were to do that. He always makes sure to move very quickly so that no one can catch him. He never stays too long, and he never stays in one place. And I don't know why, except that he's more easily able to maintain a satisfactory persona if he's careful about not exceeding his welcome.
He called me into his office, and he said, in these words, he said to me, "John, I'm about to buy a car, a Pullman car, and you're going to learn everything about it." And I says, "What's a Pullman car, Mickey?" And he turned to me and said, "Choo-choo." I says, "You've got to be kidding." He says, "I'm going to take this car with my friends all over America." And he says, and he gets this look on his face, he says, "and maybe beyond." I thought, oh my God, he's going to send it to the moon.
Oh, it was organized in the most perfect manner. We had the best guides, the best professionals. We took people with us that lectured. They were Land Cruisers. And the trips usually were almost 2 months.
Amazing train, beautifully outfitted inside, everything of the period, just immaculate. With a chef, not only a chef, but a pastry chef. People got on and off at various designations, and they were told exactly how many days they could stay on the train.
But in the beginning, you know, when the people would come on board, you could see their expectation. And the first night out was such a horror because all the luggage had to be placed in small cabins, you know, and there weren't a lot of bathrooms. Each cabin had its own toilet and wash basin, but there was only one shower, and you had to line up for the shower. You could see how glum their faces were the first night out. But the minute they went out on the back of the car and they came completely black from soot in their evening clothes, they were hooked.
He would do everything he could to bring people together with disparate personalities who he knew or he thought would really dislike each other. Mickey loved anarchy and tension, and he was a prankster. But in the end, when he would put them in close proximity and they couldn't escape, they had to work out their differences, and he loved watching the fireworks.
The train just enhanced his motivation for collecting even more. He would go into antique stores and he'd wind up buying this enormous bed or enormous WPA trunk, and he would bring it back to the rail car. There was no way it would come through the door. He wouldn't think about that. He wanted the item. So what we did on many occasions is we would have to remove one of the enormous plate glass windows. And in would come the trunk, in would come all this stuff that he would buy. One of the happiest moments in Mickey's life, and I spied on him. I actually eavesdropped on this great moment of Mickey's. And that's when he was sitting on the back of the Hampton Roads, going down the tracks, and there would be this smile and this look of great contentment, of absolute peace. You, looking at Mickey, would think, what is he thinking about? Where is he finding his contentment? Is it the end of the two tracks? Is he thinking of his next destination? I think it's all a big metaphor. That was exactly what it was all about. We would get off of a trip, and he would have the next trip all planned in pieces of napkins and scratch paper. He would pull this out of his pocket and say, "Here, John, here's your next quest, here's your next trip."
When Wolfson finally found a site for his long-planned museum, it turned out to be the Washington Storage Building in Miami Beach, where he'd been storing part of his collection over the years.
Someday Ocean Drive will be lined with chic cafes. Mickey believed that before I did. I laughed when I heard it. Because there were no restaurants, no cafes, no bars on Ocean Drive, and it was very run down and seedy and hadn't been painted in 20 years. But Mickey had a greater sense of confidence in this because he had grown up in Miami Beach.
The museum project couldn't have come at a worse time, because just as ample funds were needed for renovation, Wolfson's ferocious collecting began to take its toll.
Mickey was buying at just amazing rates, and in fact, when the first official director came on, she implored Mickey to go on a moratorium of buying, and he promised, and it lasted maybe 3 days, and then again the crates started arriving.
When I arrived at the dock of the Wolfsonian, the loading dock, I remember seeing something like 400 boxes lined up, wondering what that could all be, different sizes from different places all over the world. And the registrar who was there at the time said, well, that's what's come in the last couple of months, and we haven't opened the boxes yet. So I thought, oh, it'll be like Christmas every day.
There was a period when I'd like to say they were on the Versailles budget, and it was Mickey's money, but it wasn't all being, I don't know how to say this, but I think it could have been differently spent.
Sooner or later, the inheritance would be depleted, yes. I would estimate that maybe he was spending $10 million a year on collections. I mean, that's a wild estimate.
Art is expensive, and he was really building the market for the art he was buying. So Mickey's collecting went to a whole new height.
The idea of the Wolfsonian started out as a much smaller idea. And I think what Mickey has the capacity of doing is really getting everybody so excited about possibilities and potential and ambition.
So now you're not measured just in relation to other private collections. You're measured in relationship to other major institutions that deal with design, decorative arts, and you've got to be cutting edge, and you've got to have objects that compare with the great institutions of Europe.
When he bought the building and started renovating it with Mark Hampton, suddenly it became, much, much more. And I don't think he realized how much it was going to take until he was deep into it. He knew he didn't have the money to endow it. And an institution with your name on it has to be endowed, at least to begin with.
Because the building opened at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1996. And we played...
I didn't realize the extent to which there was no money to run it. But there's probably 6 months worth of money.
It became evident that this could not be sustained by an individual. We thought that an institutional partner would be, would be a good thing to do. So Charlie Coles, one of our board members, had a contact at FIU. By June of 1997, we became part of Florida International University.
His vision was too grand for him to sustain alone. Even his own wealth wasn't adequate to make an institution of the scope and breadth and depth that he had envisioned.
It had to happen that way, though, for it to really run in a smoother, more orderly manner, because Mickey, with all of his magic, really, that's around him, can create a lot of turmoil in terms of just getting things done, doing things in an orderly manner. It does not matter to Mickey. He's not interested in that at all. He's interested in the most interesting, creative way of doing something.
Invention, and then development, and then urban, and then the city. So this was to be the conduit.
If the press and the gossip saw Mickey Wolfson landing in the poorhouse, they were mistaken.
And I went to him once, and I was trying to probe for information, as I do, because I'm basically a reporter myself. And I said, Mickey, I think it's very sad that you're down to your last million. I'm very worried about you. And he gave me this penetrating look cold and harsh. And then he smiled and said, "Well, that's wrong, but it's so sweet of you to be concerned."
Run out of money. I think I'm very judicious. I mean, I know what I'm doing, and I have, enough to keep going like this. And I was creative with my expenditures because I didn't, I exchanged one value for another. The buildings, the collections, and so forth, when they were given, what was it estimated, $186 million, now it's $500 million more. So, I mean, that gives me some satisfaction to have been the instigator of a patrimony that's worth more than $500 million. I mean, that was private, private money.
The moment the collection was in the public eye, it was subject to public scrutiny.
In the early days, nobody really quite knew what this collection was. The New York Times once called it junk. And Mickey always was very amused by all that. He loved it. He loved that type of, it didn't bother him at all.
Oh yeah, there was big criticism, especially when it went public. There were people who thought it was one of the great con jobs of the day, because they thought that the material was certainly not worthy of serious consideration. And they felt it was really a lot of junk and just the reflection of a whimsical nature of a man with a large fortune.
No one was collecting this material in a way that Mickey was collecting it, or on a scale that he was collecting it. And as the collection was built and unveiled, the critics took a totally different view. I think they were intrigued, and they were discovering much of this for the first time.
They also discovered that Miami, a city with a large and prominent Jewish presence, had suddenly become host to a collection that some called controversial, others scandalous.
That I think it started with the press. When the press came into the building, the first thing they would focus on was the fascist or the Nazi material, and it's certainly represented in the collection. And it has a big personality because it doesn't exist anywhere else, but I think it was the fascination that anybody would dare.
Do you think we dare? Why not? Oh, is it too?
What do you have in mind when you say kids?
No, I want something really.
And we showed it, and we didn't push it in people's noses. We explained it, and we explained it in a way that people understood we were not Nazis. We were quite the opposite.
Was this for Hitler's trip to Italy?
Tourism
Tour guide. Minister from folks. How is it possible that this country, Germany, a kind of model, if you will, could descend into the depths of such horror? You know the book, of course, It Can't Happen Here. Well, it could happen here, and it could happen here or anywhere now and in the future. And I always felt if you were able to study this material intelligently, you would find the secret of what motivated such a regime, and thus you would be able to avoid it.
Mickey is also courageous enough to acknowledge that these people, the Nazis, let's say, or the fascists in Italy, were not just crude characters, that there was something brilliant about their methods.
The whole period style.
This is probably what Mickey collected in just an afternoon.
The first decision of the Nazi parliament was to publish Mein Kampf in Braille, and this is it. And there's six volumes of it, and it's amazing because it has even reproductions, not in this volume, but portraiture in Braille. Now, the reason only 2 of these survive.
We assume that our visitors are smart and that they understand, how these objects have been used, and that we have the good, the bad, and the ugly.
The Nazis and the fasci. But what's interesting,
he really is quite careful to make clear that he's not collecting in the same way that other people collect. He's not collecting he's not satisfying something, some personal drive or desire.
Or one-dimensional object the sense of movement as you could only capture.
He conceived the idea long ago that this was not for himself. And I don't even feel that he has a very sort of proprietary attitude toward any of these objects that he's collected. What we see in the Wolfsonian is Mickey's contribution to the community. He's not really even developing relationships with these objects after he's purchased them.
I'm more really a preservationist than I am a collector, because it turns out that I didn't want any of it. See, a collector wants something, and I didn't want anything. I wanted to gather and hunt it down, but I didn't want it.
It's a beautiful example.
There's a Faustian element in Mickey, too, that I love to think about. I like to think of him as he's sort of a combination of a Southern gentleman, a bon vivant, and Faust, because he's looking for that moment. Verweile doch, du bist so schön. Tarry a while, you are so beautiful. That is the moment that he's looking for.
Oh, that's how much is that? Now think a minute before you tell me.
Because what really interests him is that moment where he's really inflamed with desire.
150?
As far as the acquisition of something goes, I think once the moment's passed, it's passed.
No, you see, that's not fun. Like the old days. Where are the old days gone?
That's what we all.
Genoa, everybody has their cross to bear. And since I'm a masochist, Genoa is most appealing.
Wolfson's testing ground turned out to be his old favorite, the Italian city of Genoa.
It was a worthy protagonist. It was my school. It's where I learned the most about human nature and reality.
Here, his long-held Italian collection has found a new home at the Wolfsoniana Museum, just outside the city.
He refers to the Wolfsoniana and the Wolfsonian as sisters. It took a while to weave it all together. It's given to the region of Liguria, and which is like the state of Florida, very similar situation.
That's an amazing. How are you?
Mickey's collection was quite extraordinary. Lies in obsession with and success in assembling the most amazing collection of futurism and fascist artifacts. And of course,
the Italians knew about this material, but it had gone underground after the war. So it's only now being represented to the public because it's 50 years later, and the public is curious again to know what they suppressed. Also, the heat's off, and serious scholars, students, kids, want to know about what their grandparents and parents did.
Now that it's all been given away, what's a collector to do? When Mickey Wolfson does his rounds, whom is he collecting for?
He's now rented offices again in downtown Miami, and he's hired a curator for his collections, and he has a secretary to handle his business relations and travel. And he's starting all over again, doing the same thing that he did 30 or 40 years ago. He sees that what he created is fantastic and is a wonderful gift to posterity, but he's not going to stop. The remarkable thing about the man, he just does not stop and will not stop until he's in his grave.
This is by Gochar. He was a Cubo-futurist Czech. And this comes from Silesia. And it was made for a man who owned huge coal mines.
Wolfson likes to call his collection his autobiography. It reflects who he is, where he's been, and what he believes.
Self, symbolized by Joan of Arc. What do I believe in? I believe in the individual. I don't believe in movements. I don't collect movements. I collect individual artists speaking to me individually through the language of objects. I don't adhere to any aesthetic. I'm not interested in the Bauhaus, which is a religion, if you will. What do I believe in? Oh, the body dies and disappears, and the spirit, though, manifests itself elsewhere. And it's easier for artists, and that's why they're universally admired. It's not simply for what they make. It's also for the fact that they've capitalized or concretized something that, though the concrete, like the body, disappears, the memory or the spirit of the object remains forever. And so if you can somehow associate yourself with creativity, and most of the people around me are creative, so I have a sense of camaraderie and family through that.
And so we leave Mickey Wolfson in the 1960s caddy inherited from his father. Would the Colonel, we wonder, still call his son's collection glorious junk? Mickey Wolfson has long made his peace with that, content that after years of wooing the public, this fickle public just may have come around to embrace him and his vision.
Log on to souvenirsmovie.com to learn more about Souvenirs, the many worlds of Mickey Wolfson.